both Nicole and I are pretty tired today, as are a lot of you who stayed up to watch Democrats undermine our democracy and give parents a big middle finger in the middle of the night. Here's what it looked like at 2:30 a.m. when Democrats unanimously voted to upend the Parental Rights Initiative.
Madam Speaker, the state doesn't own our kids. Please vote no on this bill.
Further remarks? Seeing none, the question before the House is final passage of engrossed substitute House Bill 1296.
Madam Speaker, there are 56 yeas, 37 nays, 5 excused.
Having received a constitutional majority, engrossed substitute House Bill 1296 is declared passed.
Every single Democratic member of the State House of Representatives voted to strip away the parental rights that they voted to give you 9 months ago, 10 months ago. That 500,000 people in the state signed an initiative saying they wanted. You know, how vile this is. Truly, and I was just thinking this week, Democrats had taken some good votes, I thought, a few Democrats, not all of them. There were a handful of Democrats who I thought, good for them. They'd taken some difficult votes against their own party in the House and the Senate, and I thought, I'm going to make a list this week of all the Democrats who didn't let their state down and their constituents down. And now my list is like at 0. Maybe Bob Ferguson's the only one on my list this week. You know, when I say the word vile, I truly mean that, because you have to understand, for those of you who haven't followed this debate, how intentional all of this was. How intentional it was to be at this point at 2:30 in the morning and to do this under the cover of darkness. And it's been more than a year in the making. And to reset it before I go through some of the insane stuff said last night that I want people to see, because a lot of you have jobs and have families. You know, while you were tucking your kids in at bed, they were starting the debate to upend your parental rights. Just insane. So for those of you who need a reset, I think for everyone, let's just reset so we understand how egregious this is. You know, the state of Washington has been continually stripping away parental rights for years and years and years on a variety of fronts, including your right to know what's happening with your kids medically, and then at school. You know, basically making it so that you drop your kid off at school, and if you do that, you're handing them over to the government, and you don't have any say whatsoever in what happens to your kids once they're behind those doors, which is ridiculous, right? Ridiculous. And so now they go in there, they push all this extreme gender ideology and political indoctrination down their throat. You don't get to know any of it. You don't get to see any of it. You don't get to ask about any of it. They'll hook your kids up with medication. They'll diagnose your kids with things, send your kid home. Your kid's acting weird. You have no idea why. And there are a lot of parents in this state, right, left, and center, who aren't okay with that. Understandably so, because it's insane. And this idea that Democrats firmly believe, and I'll play a clip that proves it once and for all, in case anybody was in doubt, that they can parent your kids better than you can, that schools can parent your kids better than you can, that schools can be trusted more so than you to help your child navigate the difficult complexities of growing up in this world. So that led to Let's Go Washington doing a slew of initiatives, including one that was overwhelmingly popular, the Parental Bill of Rights. And what it said simply is parents are the primary stakeholders in their kids' lives. And therefore, they have a right to have access to this information. They have a right to get the curriculum and lessons in a certain period of time. They have a right to know what's happening with their kids, medically speaking, when they go to school. And the school connects them with therapists or doctors, and your kid might be suicidal. And you think that's a good reason, that's healthy to hide that from a parent? Or your kid goes to school and they've been indoctrinated by someone in the Olympia school district or whatever it is to believe that they are not the gender that they were born. And so when they go to school, everyone keeps the secret. Tommy is now Tammy at school, and we're going to call Tommy Tammy, but we're not going to tell Tommy's parents that Tommy's going by Tammy at school, because a parent can't be trusted with that information, because parents are all bad, bad people. So this gets 500,000 signatures. And as you know, it was an initiative to the legislature, which meant that the legislature could vote it into law without it going through this process of becoming a ballot measure and voters voting on it in November. And Democrats were very strategic. And honestly, this is a little evil. I think it's evil. I think it's evil. There's strategy that's political, and I get it, and that always works its way in. But when you're strategizing a year in advance to screw over parents, that's evil. So they, on a bipartisan basis, overwhelmingly, there were like a few no votes last year. It was completely unanimous in the Senate. They passed the Parental Rights Initiative into law. Yay, look at us. We love parents. We love parents' rights. All the Democrats, like, we're good people. But they did it because they didn't want it to go to voters. They didn't want the initiative to go to voters in a critical election year when there were other initiatives on the ballot that if they passed, they would have stripped hundreds of millions of dollars in tax revenue from the state. And so they were worried about the Parental Rights Initiative, which was pretty popular and pretty plain in language, going to voters, and that initiative sort of propping up the other initiatives, like the initiative to repeal capital gains, et cetera, et cetera. So they made a strategic decision. We're going to vote this thing through. And we're going to act like we love parents. All the while they knew every step of the way that what they would do is come back this legislative session and undo it. They knew it the whole time. And so, a lot of the debate that happened overnight was Democrats saying, well, this parental rights initiative was really confusing. It just confused a lot of things. And this parental rights initiative, violated federal privacy laws. You passed it. So now you're telling on yourself. You're saying that the parental rights initiative was a load of crap, basically, and it confused everybody. You passed it. And so now we obviously know for sure that you passed it knowing you'd come back this year and upend it after the election happened, right? And then you would do it. You would do it at 2:30 in the morning. They've had weeks to do this. They've had weeks to have this debate in the open, to take a vote in the open. They did this strategically. It was a 6.5-hour debate, and they didn't start it until 7:30 or 8 o'clock at night, after the drive time news, right? After the 5 and 6 o'clock news. And then they voted on it at 2:30 in the morning. And it's all intentional. It's a big slap in the face to parents and a big middle finger to democracy. Because you're talking about upending an initiative. And you know what you're doing. You knew what you were doing all along. You don't care about voters. You don't care about parents. You think you can parent better than the government. So we knew this was going to happen. And it goes over to the Senate. We'll see what happens. This isn't a done deal. But certainly if the House passed it with no Democrats dissenting, I don't see how we'd get a different outcome in the Senate, right? So there were some things said that are just insane. And I think sum up this entire debate. And I want you, if anybody's watching this who's on the fence about this, like whether the parental rights initiative was a good thing or a bad thing, I want to play for you some of this 6.5-hour debate. And at the end of this segment, I want you to ask yourself, do I feel differently about it now? If you're someone who supports, the upending of parental rights, I want you at the end of this to be able to take a side. And I think it'll be pretty clear what side is on the side of sanity and common sense. So Republicans introduced amendment after amendment after amendment after amendment, just trying to improve this thing. They knew it was going to pass. You don't, as the Democrats in control, bring a bill to the floor, last bill before cutoff, not knowing you have the votes, right? So they knew it was going to pass. So they're putting forth some amendments just to try to make it better, right? To try to keep intact some of the most important aspects of the Parental Bill of Rights initiative. So Representative Michael Keaton, he had an amendment, and it was very smart, actually, very strategic. He actually read, and I'll let him explain it, because he read from the amendment on the floor, and it just very plainly talks about, hey, when parents are involved in their kids' education, outcomes are better. Let's just add this language into this bill. Here he is.
May I read from the amendment?
Please proceed.
The legislature finds that parental involvement is a crucial factor in shaping the educational outcomes of students and contributing to the well-being of society. Parents are the primary stakeholders in their children's upbringing. When parents actively engage in their child's education, it enhances the student's academic performance, motivation, and overall development. Strong parental involvement also fosters a supportive learning environment, both at home and school, helping students develop confidence, resilience, and a sense of responsibility. Moreover, Active participation from parents in their child's education builds a stronger school community, promotes positive behavior, and supports the creation of a more equitable learning opportunities. Ultimately, when parents and schools work together, it benefits the individual student and strengthens society by nurtured, educated, responsible, and engaged citizens.
Who would disagree with that? I think that's very nice. Hopefully everybody agrees with that, right? Parents being involved, working with schools to make sure they're bettering academic outcomes, et cetera, et cetera. Let's just add that just as a statement of fact and intent into this bill. And Representative Jim Walsh, as he often does, was able to put it in more layman's terms to understand what the true intent of this was.
Let's agree that parents, broadly defined, are the primary stakeholders in raising children. I believe that that's the spirit of this amendment, and it is an important principle for us to have in our public policy. Parents, not the state, not the government, are the primary stakeholders in raising children. This is important, Mr. Speaker. Please vote yes.
Okay, so that's the amendment we're voting on. Do you believe that parents are the primary stakeholders in their child's lives? Yes or no? Let's watch the vote.
The question before the House is the adoption of Amendment 373. All of those in favor say aye. Aye. All of those opposed say nay. No. The amendment is not adopted.
That tells you everything you need to know. It was that simple. Let's add a line. Parents are the primary stakeholder, not the government. Parents are the primary stakeholder in their child's lives. The Democrats voted it down. So if you believe that parents, that you as a parent are the primary stakeholder in your child's upbringing, then you know who's on your side. If you believe the government is the primary stakeholder in the upbringing of your child, then by all means, keep voting for Democrats. That's as simple as it is, and it's as plain as day. They voted against that. So there were a couple other just real crazy things. So one of the amendments that was talked about is, it's really difficult for local school districts to opt out of some of the craziness that's happening, that's being pushed on them by the state. And we know that Kruse, the superintendent of public instruction, has essentially threatened local school districts who don't buy into and push and teach this radical gender ideology. And so if you don't do it, he's threatening to strip funding from local school districts. So there was, this was an insane moment. So Rep. Ed Orcutt was talking about an actual example that happened with one of his constituents where their child, and we've talked about many examples like this on the show, where a child is sent home with something disturbing as part of their assignment for class. And a parent only finds out about it because they, went through their kid's backpack, or their kid said, hey, look what I got sent home with, and it's very disturbing. It's the first time a parent's finding out that there's something often sexually explicit that their teenager has been sent home with as part of reading material or homework. So Ed Orcutt is giving a fairly descriptive example, right, of something that one of his constituents' children was sent home with, and how it's an example of why parents need to have the ability to be alerted and to opt out of assignments like this one.
Even when those school boards are opposed to them, when community members are opposed to them, those school boards cannot make the decision on their own, because they are right now under the threat from the superintendent of public instruction of having some of their funding canceled. Imagine the frustration of the parents when they see their kid come home with a comic book. On page 282 of that comic book, there's a graphic of a woman who is naked, and it's showing her from about the ribs down. Lying down, her legs in the air, and another person's face between her legs.
Please refrain from such graphic descriptions, and please confine your remarks to the policy.
If it's too graphic for me to talk about here on the floor of the House, is it not too graphic for a teenager to be taking home? Is it not too graphic for the teenager to see this before the parents even get to see it?
That's a good question. And again, if something's too graphic to be talked about in debate by politicians amongst adults on the floor of the State House of Representatives, how can you then turn around and say it's not too graphic to send home with a preteen without their parents knowing about it? This is the kind of stuff that prompted the initiative on the Parental Bill of Rights. What an asinine thing. And you heard the kind of, it's laughter at that point from Republicans like, how ridiculous is this? He's giving an actual example of something that happened to a Washington parent. And he's gavelled and told not to be so graphic on the floor of the House. Because it's laughable, right? If an adult can't talk about it, why should a child be given it? And of course, they rejected that amendment. The Democrats did. Nicole, can we jump ahead to the Jim Walsh on gender identity thing quick? So there's these examples of just blatantly ridiculous stuff, right? That just prove the point of why we need a parental bill of rights. And this is one of them. So Representative Jim Walsh is trying to get to, again, they're pushing all these amendments. Let's try to improve this. He's trying to get to this term gender expansive, which actually is a coincidence because on the show yesterday, I'm like, what does that even mean? Like, what is gender expansive? And so he's saying we need to further define that when we talk about the protections for gender expansive students. Like, what does that really mean? So here he is talking about an amendment that would narrow that to only human-based gender identities.
Our law has no clear definition of what gender expansive means. And we know, having heard from parents and families and school administrators, that in some places, some children consider their gender identity to include non-human characteristics, that their notion of gender includes animal characteristics, a dog or a cat. And so what this amendment does is it narrows this definition of gender expansive expression to human gender.
Sounds fair, right? Like, hey, let's, cool, gender expansive, leave that stuff in, different gender identities. We know you're not going to strip that out. So, if somebody wants to, boy, girl, they, them, whatever it is, multiple people even, fine. But if they identify as a dog or a cat or a mythical beast of some kind, I think schools ought to try to bring them back to some semblance of a human identity, right? Well, not according to Democrats, because there are some good reasons not to do that.
I think we've talked before about my son. He is autistic with selective mutism, and communication's really hard for him. One of the things that makes it a lot easier is when he doesn't have to use words. And when he's happy and he greets me, sometimes he'll be wagging his imaginary tail. Or he'll growl when he's unhappy.
I give up. That sounds like a parenting problem, to be honest. And it also sounds like something we're going to want to try to get going in the right direction. And look, I understand that kids have learning disabilities, but the fact that your son, who has some issues, growls at you occasionally, is not cause to leave in a definition that could include students who want to identify as animals. So they rejected this amendment, and one of the things that Democratic lawmaker also said is she said that this amendment was all built on a lie, that there was a school in the Midwest that they were putting litter boxes in the bathroom for kids. And she was basically saying it's a total lie, manufactured by the right, that these students are identifying as animals, which, as you know, it's not a lie. We've done stories in the not too distant past with pictures of kids at schools dressed as animals, like they have little furry clubs. Because, of course, social contagion. So one comes in wearing ears and a tail, and the rest of them are now hopping around acting like cats or other mythical beasts. Like, shouldn't we all be able to agree that, hey, gender expansive, we're in a progressive state, people are transgender, whatever it is, but we're not going to encourage children who want to wear tails and hop around. But apparently not. That's how extreme Washington Democrats are. Couldn't even support that amendment. So those are the obvious ones where it's sort of like, well, that's just ridiculous. Some things that happened last night were a little less obvious, but almost proved our point in a better way. And I want to play one of those for you because I don't think it will get played anywhere else. So there was an amendment that talked about discipline. So we know that our schools have gotten very lax on disciplinary measures against kids because, can't do that. Kid causing problems in the classroom, repeatedly impacting the learning of other students, and they don't do anything about it. So we can't discipline kids. That's wrong, right? And in the eyes of Democrats, this is a Republican amendment. Hey, we need to make sure that if students are repeatedly causing disciplinary issues that are impacting the learning of other students, that that's taken seriously. So, but the Democratic argument is the same as it has been. It's why OSPI doesn't really discipline kids, because in the eyes of Democrats, discipline ends up just being racist. Here's the clip.
Evidence showed that it disproportionately impacted African American students, particularly African American boys. They were being denied their educational opportunity.
Which is because more African American boys were having disciplinary issues. It's like this, and I'm going to get to the gotcha moment in a second, but basically, we can't institute harsher discipline because it'll disproportionately impact young black men. As if it's the system being racist and teachers being racist and schools being racist by disciplining a disproportionate number of young black men. And they don't want to entertain the possibility that there's a disproportionate number of young black men who are engaged in problematic behavior at schools. And how can we deal with that? Besides just ignoring it because, it's racist. Because they've got to say you got like 10 boys in front of you and they're all acting up. Well, only you, whitey, you 3 white kids, you go to the principal's office. We'll take 1 black kid, you go to the principal's office. 1 Asian kid, come with us. The rest of you are off the hook because if we disciplined all of you, we would be disciplining a disproportionate number of people of color. Like, that's really the way their mind works. Because it's disproportionate, because you have more young black men who have disciplinary issues in our schools, apparently, disproportionate number, then you just let them off the hook. As if that's going to fix the problem, right? It's just the stupidest argument. So this state lawmaker goes on to totally tell on herself and actually makes the Republican argument, the parental rights argument here. So she's saying, rather than institute harsher discipline in our schools, right? Let me tell you what, once our state realized, this is racist, we can't continue this disciplinary action that we're doing because it impacts young black kids. She says the state took a lot of steps to improve this situation. And she gives an example of what her school district did that worked so well.
A number of things occurred. They created the Oversight and Accountability Committee. They gave teachers more training on classroom management. And in my community, Madam Speaker, parents created the South King County Discipline Coalition. And through this work, we have found that we are improving the educational opportunities for all students.
Wait a second, did I hear that right? So parents got involved and helped the schools improve educational opportunities and outcomes for students. So a problem in our schools, in your schools, was solved by increased participation from parents. Ladies and gentlemen, I give you the whole purpose behind the Parental Bill of Rights. Yet that Democratic lawmaker in that moment didn't even notice that she was making that argument. It's crazy to me. So a lot of stuff happened, ended with the vote, of course. One of the things that was discussed over and over, and I just have to talk about it because it made national news when it was first being discussed. And there's so many good examples of why we needed it. You remember when this bill was in committee and Republicans were trying to change some language in the bill, that Democrats had put in the bill that if something happens to your kid at school, basically, or let's say they're accusing a teacher of sexually assaulting them or some other thing happens, that instead of saying you have to tell parents immediately, it was you have to tell parents at the first available opportunity or at least within 48 hours. And Republicans are like, within 48 hours? Why would you give them 48 hours to tell a parent that a teacher might have sexually assaulted their child? And that just blew up all over nationally because Democrats rejected it. And so there were some amendments attempting to fix that situation. Like, hey, we can't wait 48 hours to tell a parent that something serious has either happened to their child or their child is making a serious accusation against a teacher or a staff member. So that debate was happening again on the floor. And Democrats kept claiming that, like, that doesn't happen. That, of course, schools are going to get in touch with parents ASAP. And I could not help but think of a story that came out yesterday that proves the exact point of schools can't be trusted to do that anymore. Did you hear about this tragic, oh my God, this heartbreaking story? So there's an immigrant family in Seattle Public Schools, and their 12-year-old child, Arsima McConan, was outside Washington Middle School with some classmates during what they call second lunch, which I'm not sure what second lunch is. So there was a vehicle, and the driver of that vehicle, 51-year-old, left it in a no parking zone, and the vehicle backed into her and killed this 12-year-old instantly. And so this had happened a couple days ago. Just horrible story, right? So what would be your expectation? Your child, 12-year-old, whatever age, goes to school and they get killed at school, okay? Of course the school's going to call you right away. Of course the school's going to be like, what can we do? Oh my gosh, this is a tragedy, right? Well, according to Kruse 7, which interviewed this deceased child's parents, at the time of the interview, by the time it aired, Seattle Public Schools had still not reached out to the family of a dead 12-year-old yet.
Heartbroken by this tragedy.
Seattle School Superintendent Brent Jones spoke to reporters soon after the accident, but Arsima's parents say neither he nor anyone else with the school district has reached out to them.
They were just left here to fend for themselves and figure out the rest.
Now they feel betrayed by their adopted country.
I brought my daughter from Ethiopia here to have a better life, to go to a better school, get better education, and then I send my child to school and I don't get my child back.
What kind of piece of shit school do you have to be to not call the parents of a child who died there? That's disgusting. Immigrants to this country came here for a better life. 12-year-old hit and killed by a car outside the school days ago. Seattle Public Schools didn't as much as a phone call to the parents to express their condolences, to ask how can we help, what can we do for you. And Democrats in Olympia want us to believe that it's not a problem in the law to give schools 48 hours to contact parents if something happens to their kids. And look, did police do it? Of course. Of course police were in touch with these parents. Their child had just been killed. But not so much as a phone call, email even from the school. And when Kruse 7 asked the school why not, they basically said, we're working on it. Working on it, what do you mean? Because the school, and this speaks to the reason why Democrats would not strengthen that wording in the bill. You know why the school didn't contact those parents? You know exactly why. They're worried about getting sued. They wanted to be careful about what they said so they could avoid responsibility. So they didn't contact the parents, probably until they ran past what they were going to say with their attorneys. And that's the reason why Democrats in Olympia don't want schools to have to immediately reach out to parents if a child makes an accusation of sexual assault or something from a teacher. It's not because they want to give the police time to do their jobs, as they have said previously. No, it's because they want time to cross their T's and dot their I's and make sure that whatever they say to parents won't get them sued, because they care more about a lawsuit than they do about parents and parental rights and doing the right thing. And that just encompasses this whole debate. It's insane to me, after we play all of that, after we talked about all of this, that there could be any parent, one parent in the state of Washington who would support what Democrats did last night. I don't know how one parent who has all of the information could support what Democrats did last night. And I'll tell you what, there are a whole hell of a lot of parents among the Democratic caucus in the House who did this to other parents. You think for 1 second that those Democrats would like it if anything like this happened to their kid and happened to them? If their child was accusing a teacher of sexual assault and the school didn't contact them for 2 days, you think a single one of those Democrats who took that vote would be happy about that? Of course not. But if it happens to your kid, that's just fine. Your kid sent home with pornography as a reading assignment, they don't care. If their kid was sent home with something they didn't agree with, maybe a Bible verse, they'd lose their minds. They don't care about you. They don't care about your kids. They don't care about you as a parent. They don't care about your household. They want kids in this state to be raised in their image with their ideology by their biggest campaign donors, the Washington Education Association. That's what all of it is about. And parents are in the way. And that's what they showed us last night. So the fight on this isn't over. I realize I talked about it for 40 minutes. The fight on this isn't over. There's 2 versions of this that are still alive. The Senate version sits in a House committee. The House version is going to get sent over to a Senate committee. And we'll see if they decide to push one of these forth. If they do, as you know, Let's Go Washington has already pre-filed an initiative to unravel it. So that will be the next assignment, essentially. If they decide to push this through, Let's Go Washington will immediately launch an initiative. We'll have to get it out to as many people as possible. And we will drain the bankrolls of the Washington Education Association as they fight against it. At the end of the day, if that's all that happens is we cost them tens of millions of dollars having to fight against another initiative, well, so be it.